My stepdaughter looked me in the eye and said the greatest gift for her wedding would be if I did not come. She told me I was not her real dad, I was just Robert, the man who wrote the checks. My wife sat right there next to her and stayed silent. She did not defend me. She did not say a word. So I did exactly what they asked. I disappeared. But before I left, I made sure I took everything that belonged to me. After selling the house they were sleeping in and canceling every single wedding vendor, the only thing I left in the empty kitchen was a folding chair and a receipt for $0. It was the shock of their lives. Before I tell you how I dismantled their world in 72 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that loyalty is expensive and betrayal should never be free. My name is Robert Sullivan. I am 68 years old, and for the last 15 years I have been the silent engine keeping a luxury lifestyle afloat for people who secretly despised me. I spent my life looking at spreadsheets calculating risks as a chief financial officer for a Fortune 500 company. I know how to spot a bad investment. I just never realized the worst investment of my life was sleeping in the master bedroom and living in the guest room down the hall. Last Friday night was supposed to be a celebration. We were at Le Bernardin, one of the most expensive seafood restaurants in Manhattan. The lighting was dim, the tablecloths were crisp white, and the air smelled of old money and quiet judgment. I was sitting across from my wife Patricia and her 26-year-old daughter Madison. Madison was glowing. She had that influencer shine, the kind that comes from weekly facials and a life free of manual labor. She was scrolling through her phone, probably checking the engagement on her latest post about wedding stress. I sat there sipping my sparkling water, waiting. The waiter placed the bill on the table. It was heavy bound in leather. Without looking up, Madison slid a cream-colored envelope across the table toward me. It was the official wedding invitation. The paper was thick, hand-pressed cotton with gold leaf lettering. I knew the texture well because I was the one who paid $5,000 for the printing. I opened it, expecting to see my name listed as the host. Traditionally, the father of the bride, or in this case the stepfather who paid for everything, is listed at the top. I scanned the elegant script. Mr. and Mrs. Gary Miller request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Madison. I froze. Gary Miller, her biological father, the man who had not paid a dime in child support since 1998, the man who showed up once a year with a hangover and a cheap toy, then disappeared when the rent was due. My name was nowhere on the invitation. I looked up at Madison. She was not looking at me. She was using her butter knife to dissect a scallop. Madison, I said, keeping my voice low, I think there is a misprint. My name is missing. She finally looked up. Her eyes were the same shade of blue as her mother's, and they held the same capacity for cruelty. It is not a mistake, Robert. We talked about it. Gary is walking me down the aisle. I felt a cold pressure in my chest. I placed the invitation down. But Gary is not hosting this wedding. I am. I have already put down $80,000 in deposits. The venue, the flowers, the catering. Gary has not contributed a cent. Madison sighed, the kind of dramatic sigh she used when a waiter brought her tap water instead of bottled. Please do not make this about money, Robert. You always make it about money. This is about aesthetics. Gary is my real dad. He has that rugged, artistic look. It fits the vintage vineyard vibe we are going for. You have to admit you are a bit corporate. You look stiff in photos. We want the pictures to be perfect for Vogue. I looked at Patricia, my wife of 15 years, the woman I had taken on cruises to the Mediterranean, the woman whose debts I cleared when we got married. Surely she would speak up. Surely she would say, Madison, that is incredibly disrespectful to the man who paid for your teeth to be straightened and your degree from NYU. I waited. Patricia took a sip of her Chardonnay. She dabbed her lips with the napkin and avoided my eyes. "Honey," she said softly to me, not to Madison. "It is her special day. We just want her to be happy. Gary is family. You know how sensitive he is about his status. We do not want him to feel excluded." Excluded. The word hung in the air. The man who abandoned them was family. The man who paid the mortgage was an accessory that did not match the decor. I looked down at the leather bill folder. $800 for a dinner where I was told I was not photogenic enough to be a father. I did not yell. I did not flip the table. Years in the corporate boardroom had taught me that when you are emotional, you lose leverage. I pulled out my American Express black card. The heavy metal card clinked against the china. "I understand," I said. "I want the photos to be perfect, too." Madison clapped her hands together. "Thank you, Robert. I knew you would get it." "Oh, and since you are being so understanding, Tyler and I were thinking about upgrading the champagne toast to Dom Perignon. It is only an extra $4,000. I looked at her smile. I saw the braces I paid for. I saw the dermatology appointments I covered. I saw the entitlement that I had watered and fertilized for a decade and a half. "Order whatever you want," I said. The ride back to Connecticut was silent. The interior of my Mercedes was soundproof, sealing us in with the tension. I drove. I always drove. Patricia sat in the passenger seat scrolling through her iPad. Madison was in the back texting her fiancé Tyler. I watched the city lights fade into the darkness of the highway. My mind was racing, but my face was stone. I was doing the math. Not the math of the wedding budget, but the math of my life. I calculated the years I postponed my retirement to fund their lifestyle. I calculated the investment portfolio I liquidated to buy the house in Greenwich, because Patricia said she needed to be closer to her friends. Patricia cleared her throat. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard in the quiet car. "Robert," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. I was thinking. Since Gary is walking Madison down the aisle, he needs to look the part. He does not have a proper suit. I kept my eyes on the road. And, well, she continued, hesitated for a second, then plunged in. "You have that beautiful charcoal Armani suit in your closet. The one you wore to the gala last year. You and Gary are about the same size now that he has lost some weight. I was wondering if we could borrow it for him just for the weekend. We do not want him looking shabby next to Madison." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. They did not just want to replace me. They wanted to strip me for parts. They wanted to dress the deadbeat dad in my clothes so he could play the role of the successful patriarch. It was almost funny. It was grotesque. I took a breath. A slow, deep breath. If I exploded now, they would paint me as the villain. They would say I was jealous, petty, controlling. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the ghost they thought I was. "Sure," I said. My voice sounded flat even to my own ears. "He can borrow the suit." "Really?" Patricia sounded surprised. "Oh, thank you, honey. You are being so big about this. I know it is awkward, but it means the world to Madison." From the back seat, Madison chirped. "Thanks, Robert. You are a lifesaver. Gary is going to look so hot." Hot. She was talking about her father. I felt a wave of nausea. I turned on the radio to drown out their voices. I put on a classical station, letting the violins fill the space. I needed to think. I needed a plan. The wedding was in 3 weeks. The final payments for the venue and the caterer were due in 5 days. That was my window. 5 days to dismantle 15 years of lies. We pulled into the driveway of the colonial house I bought 3 years ago. It was a sprawling estate with white pillars and a manicured lawn that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. The porch light was on. It looked like the American dream. Inside it was a hollow shell. I carried the shopping bags inside. Madison went straight to her room to FaceTime Tyler. Patricia went to the kitchen to pour herself another glass of wine. I told them I had some work to finish in my study. I walked down the hallway to my office. The house was filled with things I had paid for. The Persian rug in the foyer. The abstract painting in the hallway that Madison insisted was an investment. The grand piano that no one played. I felt like a stranger walking through a museum of my own exploitation. I entered my study and closed the door. This was the only room in the house that felt like mine. It was lined with mahogany bookshelves and smelled of old paper and leather. I sat down at my heavy oak desk. I did not turn on the computer. I just sat there in the dark for a moment listening. I could hear Patricia's voice coming from the kitchen. She must have thought I was out of earshot, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. She was on the phone. He actually said yes to the suit. Patricia was laughing. A high tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I know, right? I thought he would put up a fight, but he is so desperate to be liked. He just rolled over. There was a pause while the person on the other end spoke. I knew instantly who it was, Gary. Yeah, well, he is useful, Patricia continued. We just need to keep him sweet until after the honeymoon expenses are covered. Madison wants to go to the Maldives. It is going to be another 20 grand. Once the wedding is over, we can talk about the house. I think I can convince him to downsize to a condo so we can cash out some equity. You could get that truck you wanted. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was a long-term parasitism. They were planning to bleed me dry and then discard the husk. I heard Gary's voice faint and tinny through the speakerphone. What an old fool. Does he suspect anything about the prenup? No, Patricia scoffed. He thinks he is so smart with his finance degree, but he is soft when it comes to family. He sees himself as the savior. It is pathetic, really. He is just an old ATM machine that needs a little oiling now and then. An old ATM machine. That was it. That was the sentence that severed the last thread of affection I held for these people. The anger that had been simmering in my gut flash-boiled into something else. Something colder. Something lethal. I stood up and walked to the painting behind my desk. I swung it aside to reveal the wall safe. I spun the dial. Left to 32, right to 15, left to 8. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside were stacks of documents, passports, and backup hard drives. I reached for a blue folder at the bottom. It was labeled Premarital Assets and Estate Planning. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. I turned on the green banker's lamp. The light pooled on the documents. I opened the folder. Right on top was the deed to the house. I ran my finger over the legal description. Purchased by Robert Sullivan's sole owner. Because Patricia had credit issues from her first marriage to Gary, her name was never on the deed. We had signed a prenup that stated any asset acquired with funds from my pre-retirement accounts remained sole property. I looked at the next document. The Revocable Living Trust. It controlled the access to the accounts Patricia used for her daily spending. I looked at the wedding vendor contracts. Every single one of them was signed by me. Not Madison, not Tyler. Me. I was not just the ATM. I was the bank owner, and the bank was about to close. I checked the time. It was 11:30 p.m. on a Friday. Most people would wait until Monday to call their lawyer. I was not most people. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. It rang twice. Sullivan, a voice rasped. It was late, but Arthur Blackwood never slept. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to scorch the earth. Arthur, I said. I apologize for the late hour. You are the only client who apologizes. Arthur grunted. What is wrong? You sound like you are staring at a dead body. Not yet, I said, looking at the photo of Patricia and me on my desk. I knocked the frame face down. But I need to liquidate a property. Fast. I need a cash buyer closed in 7 days. Which property? Arthur asked. The house I am standing in, I said. There was a silence on the other line. Then Arthur chuckled, a dry, dusty sound. The Greenwich estate. Patricia is not going to like that. Patricia is not going to know, I said. Not until the locks are changed. And Arthur, I need to cancel some checks. A lot of checks. I heard the sound of a lighter clicking and a deep inhale. Start talking, Robert. I have a pen. For the next hour, I laid out the architecture of their destruction. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply moved assets from column A to column B. I instructed Arthur to trigger the penalty clauses in the wedding contracts. I authorized the immediate sale of the house to a holding company that specialized in distress purchases. They would buy it for 20% under market value if they could take possession in 48 hours. I told them to take the deal. I did not care about the loss. I would have burned the house down if it wasn't illegal. Losing money was acceptable. Losing my dignity was not. When I hung up the phone, the house was quiet. Patricia and Madison were asleep upstairs, dreaming of Armani suits and Maldives beaches. They had no idea that the roof over their heads was already sold. They had no idea that the credit cards in their wallets were already dead plastic. I walked to the window and looked out at the swimming pool glowing blue in the moonlight. I remembered teaching Madison how to swim in that pool. I remembered holding her when she cried after her first heartbreak. I remembered paying off Gary's gambling debts so he wouldn't go to jail, just so Madison wouldn't have a felon for a father. I had been a good man. I had been a generous man. But tonight, Robert the father died. Robert the CFO was back in charge, and the audit was going to be brutal. I went back to the safe and pulled out one last thing. It was a velvet box containing a diamond necklace I had bought for Madison as a wedding gift. It was worth $15,000. I looked at it for a moment, the diamonds sparkling under the lamp. Then I dropped it into the trash can next to my desk. I turned off the light and walked out of the study. I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. Patricia was sleeping soundly, her breathing deep and even. I lay down on my side of the bed, the side I paid for. I stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, the real show would begin. I would play the part of the obedient, beaten-down stepfather for exactly 48 more hours. I would smile. I would nod. I would let them think they had won. I would let them inflate the balloon of their arrogance until it was ready to burst. And then I would bring the needle. As I closed my eyes, I thought about the invite again. Mr. and Mrs. Gary Miller. I whispered into the darkness. Good luck paying the bill, Gary. The next morning, the sun hit the breakfast nook with that aggressive cheerfulness that only happens when your life is falling apart. Madison was already at the table, surrounded by bridal magazines. She was circling flower arrangements with a red marker. Patricia was making smoothies, the blender whirring loudly, drowning out any need for conversation. Morning, Robert. Patricia shouted over the noise. She poured a green sludge into a glass and set it in front of me. Drink up. You looked a little tired last night. We have a big day. The florist appointment is at 10, and then we need to go to the tailor for Gary's fitting. I looked at the smoothie. Kale and ginger. The taste of penance. I took a sip. Actually, I said, setting the glass down. I was thinking we should expand the flower budget. Madison's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. Really, I nodded, keeping my face completely neutral. I was thinking about what you said last night. About the aesthetics. If Gary is walking you down the aisle, we need the path to be spectacular. Maybe those imported orchids you liked? The ones from Thailand. Madison squealed. She actually squealed. Oh my God, Robert. Those are like triple the price. Does it matter? I asked, spreading cream cheese on a bagel. You only get married once. Let's make it Vogue-worthy. Patricia beamed at me. She walked over and kissed the top of my head. See, I told you he would come around. He just needed a good night's sleep. I smiled. It was a tight, thin smile, but they were too absorbed in their greed to notice the difference. Call the florist, I said. Tell them to double the order and put it on my tab. I watched Madison scramble for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She was texting Tyler, probably telling him that the old ATM was dispensing cash again. While she was distracted, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from Arthur Blackwood. House sale contracts ready. Buyer wired the funds. Escrow closes Monday morning. You have 48 hours to vacate. I felt a surge of adrenaline. It was done. The clock was ticking. We spent the day hemorrhaging money. At the florist, I approved a $20,000 archway. At the tailor, I paid for expedited alterations on my own suit so it would fit Gary's beer gut. I stood there in the fitting room watching the tailor pin the fabric of my Italian wool suit around the man who had slept with my wife while I was at work 20 years ago. Gary was preening in the mirror. "Not bad, Bob," he said, looking at my reflection. "You have good taste. Little tight in the shoulders, but I make it work." "You certainly do," I said. He turned to me, lowering his voice. "Hey, about the bachelor party. Tyler and I were thinking Vegas. Just a quick weekend. We might need a little injection of funds. You know to do it right." I looked at him. This man had no shame. It was a bottomless pit of need. "Send me the itinerary," I said. "I will take care of it." Gary clapped me on the back. "You're a good sport, Bob. I don't care what Patty says about you being a bore. You're all right." I mentally added Vegas trip to the list of things I would cancel on Monday. The weekend was a blur of spending. I became the yes man they had always wanted. I approved the premium open bar. I approved the live string quartet. I approved the fireworks display. With every yes, I saw Madison's respect for me diminish. To her, I wasn't a father being generous. I was a servant knowing his place. By Sunday night, the estimated cost of the wedding had ballooned to $150,000. Madison was ecstatic. Patricia was smug. Gary was drunk on my scotch. I went to my study and printed out a single document. It was the confirmation of the cancellation of all credit cards effective Monday at 9 a.m. I placed it in my briefcase next to the house sale papers. Monday morning arrived with gray skies. I dressed in my work clothes even though I was retired. Old habits. "Where are you going?" Patricia asked from the bed. She was wearing a silk eye mask. "Meeting with the financial planner." I lied effortlessly. "Just moving some funds around to cover the wedding checks." "Good," she mumbled, rolling over. "Make sure you transfer enough for the honeymoon, too." I walked downstairs. The house was silent. I looked at the living room one last time. I looked at the spot on the rug where I had played horsey with Madison when she was 10. I felt a pang of sadness, sharp and sudden. It didn't have to be this way. If they had shown me 1 ounce of gratitude, if they had just invited me to the wedding as a father. But they didn't. I walked out the front door and locked it. I keyed in the code to the lockbox I had installed on the porch railing earlier that morning. I placed the house key inside. I walked to my car. I did not look back. I drove to a coffee shop in town and ordered a black coffee. I sat by the window and waited. At 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. All accounts frozen. Authorized user cards declined. At 9:15 a.m., the first text came. It was from Madison. "Dad, I'm at the spa. My card just got declined. It's embarrassing. Can you fix it?" I did not reply. At 9:30 a.m., the real estate agent called. "The moving crew is at the house, Mr. Sullivan. They are asking if the residents are ready to leave." I took a sip of my coffee. "Proceed," I said. I could only imagine the scene. Patricia waking up to burly men packing her life into boxes. The confusion. The screaming. The realization that the ground had vanished beneath her feet. At 10 a.m., my phone began to ring. Patricia, Madison, Gary, Tyler, the florist, the caterer, the wedding planner. I watched the screen light up name after name. I felt a strange sense of peace. The silence of the car ride on Friday had been oppressive, but this silence, the silence of not answering. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I let it ring. I had a busy day ahead. I had a flight to catch. But first, I had one last stop to make. I needed to leave them a parting gift. I drove back to the house one last time. The moving trucks were already filling up. Patricia was on the front lawn, wearing her bathrobe, screaming at a man with a clipboard. She looked wild, desperate. I parked down the street and watched. She spotted my car. She started running towards me, her face twisted in rage. "Robert," she screamed. "What have you done?" I rolled up the window and drove away. This is the end of Chapter 1. The bomb has been dropped. The explosion has just begun. If you want to see how they try to fight back and how I crush their counterattack with nothing but the law and the truth, hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss the fallout. The weekend became a masterclass in psychological warfare. I had spent 40 years in finance learning how to spot a bubble, how to identify when a market was inflated by hype and greed before the inevitable crash. Now I was not just spotting the bubble. I was the one pumping the air into it. I watched them with a detached clinical curiosity as their appetites grew to match the imaginary budget I had laid out for them. Saturday morning started at the Floral Design Studio in downtown Greenwich. The air inside was thick with the scent of lilies and eucalyptus, a smell that usually reminded me of funerals. Madison was sitting across from the lead designer, a woman named Celine who had dollar signs in her eyes the moment she saw my watch. Madison was holding a sample bouquet of white roses. It was tasteful. It was modest. It was affordable. "It is nice," Madison said, but her voice lacked conviction. She looked at the price sheet and bit her lip. "The total is already at $8,000. Robert, are you sure we can go higher?" I sat back in the velvet chair, crossing my legs. I looked at Tyler, her fiancé. He was scrolling through his phone, likely checking his fantasy football stats, completely disengaged from the financial burden he was about to assume. "Madison," I said, my voice smooth and reassuring. "Do not look at the price tag. Look at the legacy. These photos will last forever. Do you want to look back at your wedding album and see budget roses? Or do you want to see a cascading waterfall of orchids that screams royalty?" Madison's eyes lit up. She looked at Celine. "Show us the orchids." Celine beamed. She pulled out a new portfolio. The designs were extravagant. Arches made of imported white Phalaenopsis orchids, centerpieces that required structural engineering to stand upright, a flower wall for the Instagram station. The estimate came back at $28,000. Tyler finally looked up from his phone. "Whoa, that is the price of a car." I leaned forward, locking eyes with the young man who had never held a steady job for more than 6 months. "Tyler," I said, "it is an investment in your image. And do not worry about the cash flow. I have already initiated a transfer from my brokerage account. It just takes a few business days to clear." Tyler relaxed. "Oh. Okay. Cool." Then came the trap. I patted my pockets, feigning annoyance. "Damn," I said. I left my wallet in the other jacket. "Tyler, you have your credit card right. Put the deposit down. It is just $5,000 to hold the date. I will write you a check for the full amount on Monday morning when the markets open. Plus, think of the points. You could probably get a free flight out of this transaction alone." Greed is a powerful anesthetic. It numbs the survival instinct. Tyler looked at Madison. She nodded encouragingly. He pulled out his credit card. It was a card with a high limit that his parents had co-signed for. He handed it to Celine with a trembling hand. "Put it on the card," he said, trying to sound like a big shot. I watched the machine beep, Approved. The trap was set. The contract was in Tyler's name. The liability was his. The promise of reimbursement was just air. We moved from the florist to the caterer. This was supposed to be a simple tasting, but I had other plans. The original menu was chicken cordon bleu. Safe, boring, cheap. Gary met us there. He was wearing a polo shirt that was too tight, looking like he had just rolled out of bed. He sat at the head of the table, as if he were paying the bill. "The chicken is dry," Gary announced, tossing his fork onto the plate. "If I am walking my girl down the aisle, we cannot serve dry chicken. It reflects poorly on the family." I suppressed a laugh. The only thing reflecting poorly on this family was the man sitting at the head of the table, but I nodded in agreement. "Gary is right," I said. "This is a celebration. We need something that makes a statement." I signaled the chef. "Bring out the surf and turf option. The Maine lobster and the filet mignon." Patricia's eyes widened. "Robert, that adds another $100 per head. We have 200 guests." I reached over and squeezed her hand. My touch was cold, but she interpreted it as affection. "Patty," I said, "I want you to be proud. I want your friends to talk about this wedding for years. Let them have the lobster." The chef brought out the platter. Steamed lobster tails with drawn butter. Steaks seared to perfection. Gary tore into a lobster tail with his bare hands, butter dripping down his chin. "Now this," Gary mumbled with a mouthful of food. "This is class." "Good call, Bob." I watched the meat. I watched Madison take a selfie with the lobster. I watched Tyler calculate the points he would get on his credit card. Because once again, when the bill for the upgrade deposit came, I insisted they put it on their cards. "It builds your credit history," I told them. "It looks great for mortgage applications when you show you can pay off large balances. I will clear it all on Monday." They signed. They ate. They laughed. They were feasting on their own future bankruptcy. By Sunday afternoon, the bubble was enormous. We had upgraded the bar to the premium platinum package. We had hired a 12-piece jazz orchestra instead of a DJ. We had booked a vintage Rolls-Royce for the getaway car. Every single contract was signed by Madison or Tyler. Every single deposit was paid with their credit cards or the emergency savings account Tyler's parents had given him for a house down payment. Total estimated debt they had accrued in 48 hours, $65,000. Sunday night we gathered in the living room. The mood was electric. Madison was high on the adrenaline of spending. Patricia was looking at me with a newfound respect, or perhaps just satisfaction, that I had finally learned my place as the financier. Gary was there too, of course. He was drinking my 20-year-old scotch, reclining in my leather armchair. To the happy couple, Gary toasted, raising his glass, and to me for making such beautiful children. Patricia giggled, and to Robert she added as an afterthought, for being so supportive. I raised my glass of water. To Monday, I said. They thought I was toasting the day I would transfer the money. They had no idea I was toasting their execution. Later that night, I went to my study. I needed to make sure the timeline was perfect. The house sale would close at 9 a.m. The movers were scheduled for 10 a.m. My flight to Italy was at 2 p.m. I sat at my desk and looked at the stack of receipts Madison had proudly handed me. She wanted me to have them, so I knew exactly how much to write the check for. I picked up my checkbook. I uncapped my fountain pen. The ink was black, permanent. I wrote the date. Monday. I wrote the payee. Madison Miller. I wrote the amount. Then I stopped. I looked at the check. It was a beautiful piece of paper. It represented safety. It represented a father's love. I ripped it out of the book. I tore it in half. Then I tore it again and again, until it was just confetti. I dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. There would be no check. There would be no transfer. There would be no rescue. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. Tyler's car was parked next to Madison's. They were staying the night. They wanted to be close to the bank in the morning. They were sleeping in a house that didn't belong to them anymore. They were spending money that didn't exist. They were planning a future on a foundation of sand, and the tide was coming in fast. I went upstairs to the guest room. I had moved my things in there quietly throughout the day. My suitcases were packed and hidden in the closet. My passport was in my jacket pocket. I lay down on the single bed. It was uncomfortable, but it felt better than the king-sized bed in the master suite. That bed was full of lies. This bed was honest. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence of the house. It was the calm before the storm. In a few hours, the sun would rise on a new reality. I fell asleep dreaming of lobster shells and withered orchids. When I woke up, the digital clock read 5 a.m. It was Monday. I got up, showered, and dressed in my travel clothes. I moved silently through the house. I could hear Gary snoring from the living room sofa. He had passed out there last night. I walked into the kitchen. The granite countertops were cold. This was the stage for the final act. I pulled the envelope from my jacket. Inside was the letter I had written, the eviction notice from the new owners, and the cancellation receipts for the few things that were actually in my name. I placed the envelope in the center of the kitchen island. I pulled up a single folding chair and placed it facing the envelope. It looked like an art installation, a monument to consequences. I checked my watch. 5:30 a.m. The moving crew for the heavy furniture, the things I was selling, not keeping, would be here in 4 hours. But I would be gone by then. I picked up my suitcase. I walked to the back door. I paused and looked at the family photos on the wall. Madison's graduation, Patricia and me in Hawaii, Gary holding a beer at a barbecue. I took them all down. I did not want them. I stacked them on the floor face down. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool morning air. The sun was just starting to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. I got into my car. I started the engine. I looked at the house one last time. "Goodbye," I whispered. I put the car in gear and drove away. The bubble was full. It was floating high in the sky, shimmering and beautiful, and I had just let go of the string. While Madison and Tyler were busy burning through their credit limits on lobster and imported orchids, I was sitting in a booth at the back of a 24-hour diner 3 towns over. The vinyl seat was cracked, and the air smelled of burnt coffee, a stark contrast to the luxury I had just left behind. But this was where business was done when you did not want to be seen. Across from me sat a man who looked like a shark in a cheap suit. His name was Mr. Kane, a representative for a private equity firm that specialized in distressed assets. They bought homes for cash, no questions asked, as long as the price was right and the closing was immediate. On the table between us lay a thick stack of documents. The deed to my house in Greenwich. The appraisal report from last year valuing the property at $2.8 million. And the contract Mr. Kane had just slid over to me. I put on my reading glasses and looked at the number on the bottom line. 2.1 million. It was a lowball offer, an insulting figure that would make any real estate agent scream. I was losing $700,000 in equity instantly, a loss of 25%. In my former life as a CFO, I would have fired anyone who brought me a deal this bad. But today I was not looking for profit. I was looking for speed. I was buying a weapon, and weapons are expensive. I looked at Mr. Kane. He was watching me tapping a gold pen against his chin, expecting me to negotiate. He thought I was desperate. He thought I was in debt. He had no idea I was simply a man who was done waiting. "The price is acceptable," I said, my voice steady. Kane stopped tapping. He blinked, surprised. "Just like that." "You know the market is hot, Mr. Sullivan. You could get more if you listed it properly. I do not have time for open houses, I replied. I do not have time for inspections or mortgage contingencies. I need the funds wired to my offshore account by tomorrow morning, and I need the title transferred immediately. But there is one condition. Kane leaned in. There is always a catch. What is it? Is the foundation cracking? Is there mold? The house is pristine, I said. I just put on a new slate roof last year. The condition is simple. I need a lease back for exactly 7 days. I will pay rent for the week. But on the 8th day at 9 a.m. sharp, you take possession. You change the locks. You bring the eviction crew if necessary. Kane smiled a predatory grin that showed too many teeth. We can do that. We are used to handling sensitive exits. But what about the other occupants? Public records show you are married. Does your wife know you are selling the roof over her head for 70 cents on the dollar? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the document that was the cornerstone of my entire plan. It was not the deed. It was something far more personal. A post-nuptial agreement dated 5 years ago. I slid it across the table. My wife has no claim to this property, I said. This was the secret weapon Patricia had conveniently forgotten about. 5 years ago, my wife had a secret of her own. She had developed a gambling habit. It started with bingo, then moved to slot machines, and finally ended in the high-stakes rooms of Atlantic City. I found out when a man with a broken nose showed up at my office demanding $150,000 that Patricia had borrowed against her jewelry. She was terrified. She was weeping on the floor of our living room, begging me to save her, promising she would never do it again. I saved her. I paid the debt. I made the problem go away. But I am a businessman. I do not give away money without securing collateral. I told her I would pay off her mistakes, but she had to sign a post-nuptial agreement. It stated clearly that in exchange for my financial bailout, she waived all rights to my premarital assets, specifically the Greenwich estate and my retirement accounts. She signed it without reading it. She was so desperate to escape the consequences of her gambling that she would have signed her soul away. She probably thought I would never use it. She probably thought I was too soft, too in love, too weak to ever enforce a contract against the woman I slept next to. She was wrong. Mr. Kane flipped through the legal pages. He read the waiver clause. He whistled low and impressed. Ironclad, he said. You really tied her hands. I did not tie her hands, I said, taking the document back. I just refused to be the one who drowned with her. I picked up the pen. The ink flowed smoothly onto the paper. Robert Sullivan. I signed my name 3 times. With each signature, I felt the weight of the house lifting off my shoulders. The heated pool. The home theater I never used. The wine cellar Gary was currently raiding. It was all gone. It was just bricks and mortar now. I stood up and shook Kane's hand. His palm was sweaty. Wire the funds, I said, and have your crew ready for Monday morning. I will leave the keys in the lockbox. When I drove back to the house, it was late afternoon. The sun was casting long shadows across the lawn, making the white pillars look like the bars of a golden cage. I pulled into the driveway and saw Patricia standing by the front door. She was holding fabric swatches up against the exterior brickwork. She waved at me, smiling. She looked happy, safe, secure. Robert, she called out as I got out of the car. I was thinking, since we are doing so much for the wedding, maybe next month we should repaint the exterior. This white is getting a little dingy. I was thinking of a soft cream color. It would look so elegant. I walked up the steps. I looked at the house that now belonged to a private equity firm. I looked at the woman who was planning renovations on a property she had been evicted from hours ago. Cream sounds nice, I said. She hooked her arm through mine. And Madison was saying we should convert your study into a nursery eventually. You know, for when she and Tyler decide to have kids. You don't really use it that much, do you? You could move your desk to the basement. The basement. They wanted to put me in the basement of a house I had just sold. The irony was so rich, I could taste it. I opened the front door for her. "After you," I said. We walked into the foyer. Gary was there, of course. He was napping on the silk sofa, his feet up on the coffee table, wearing my slippers. He opened one eye when we walked in. "Hey, Bob," he grunted. We ran out of ice. "Be a pal and grab a bag from the store." I looked at him. I looked at the ring of water damage his glass was leaving on the antique table. A normal man would have screamed. A normal man would have thrown him out. But I was in the endgame now. Every insult was just fuel. Every slight was just validation that I had done the right thing at that diner. "Sure, Gary," I said. "I will get the ice." I went to the kitchen, but I did not get ice. I went to the calendar on the refrigerator. Patricia had marked the wedding date in red heart stickers. I took a black marker from the drawer. I drew a small, inconspicuous X on the Monday following the wedding. "What's that?" Madison asked, walking in with a glass of wine. "What's happening on Monday?" I capped the marker. "Just a deadline," I said. "A business deadline. Nothing you need to worry about." She rolled her eyes. "You are always working, Robert. You need to learn to live a little, like Gary. He knows how to relax." I smiled at my stepdaughter, the girl whose tuition I paid, the girl whose car insurance I covered, the girl who was about to learn the hardest lesson of her life. "You are right, Madison," I said softly. "I am going to learn to relax, starting very soon." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them to their wine and their delusions. I had 7 days left in this house. 7 days to pack my life into boxes while they planned a party. 7 days to watch them walk toward the cliff edge, smiling the whole way. I went upstairs to my study, the room they wanted to turn into a nursery, and closed the door. I sat in the chair and listened to the silence. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of a countdown, and the clock was ticking loud and clear. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The house was sold. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the snap. The clock on the wall of my study ticked past 4 in the afternoon. The sunlight was beginning to slant through the blinds, cutting the room into strips of light and shadow. I sat in my leather chair, the one I had bought after my first big promotion 20 years ago, and waited. The house was quiet, but it was a deceptive quiet. It was the silence of a trap waiting to be sprung. On the desk in front of me lay the charcoal gray Armani suit. It was freshly dry cleaned, wrapped in plastic, looking like a body bag for a ghost. I heard the front door open without a knock. That was Gary. He never knocked anymore. Since Friday, since the moment Madison had declared him the father of the bride, he had been walking into my home, as if he held the deed. I heard his heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor, the scuff of cheap rubber soles against the expensive oak planks. He was whistling. It was a tune I did not recognize, but it sounded arrogant. "Hey, Bob," he called out. His voice echoed in the hallway. "You in the dungeon?" I did not answer. I just watched the door. A moment later, Gary appeared in the frame. He looked disheveled as always. His hair was thinning, combed over in a desperate attempt to hide the scalp, and his face carried the redness of a man who drank his breakfast. He was wearing jeans that were too tight, and a faded t-shirt that said "Legend" across the chest. The irony was almost too much to bear. "There he is," Gary said, grinning. He walked into the room and looked around. "Man, I love this room. Smells like money. Smells like old books and seriousness. You know, when I move in for a few weeks after you guys go on that trip, I think I am going to make this my command center. Maybe put a mini fridge over there by the window." He pointed to the spot where my limited edition globe stood. I said nothing. I just gestured to the suit on the desk. It is ready for you, Gary, I said. He walked over and ran his hand over the plastic. Nice, he whistled. Italian wool. The best, I said. He ripped the plastic open with a violence that made me flinch internally. He pulled the jacket off the hanger and held it up. He slipped his arms into it. It was a good fit, unfortunately. We were about the same height, though he carried his weight in his gut, while I carried mine in my chest. He buttoned it, struggling slightly with the middle button sucking in his stomach until the fabric strained. He turned to the mirror in the corner. He preened. He adjusted the lapels. He looked at himself like he was the CEO of the world. Damn, he said softly. I clean up good. Look at that bob. You can put a suit on a jagged rock and make it look smooth, huh? You look appropriate, I said. Madison will be pleased. Gary turned to face me, leaning against my desk. He crossed his arms. The fabric of my suit stretched across his back. You know, Bob, he said, his tone shifting from vanity to something sharper, something nastier. I gotta give it to you. You are taking this whole thing better than I thought you would. I looked him in the eye. I am a pragmatist, Gary. Madison wants her father. Who am I to stand in the way of biology? Gary laughed. A wet, hacking sound. Biology. Yeah. That is the thing, isn't it? You can buy them the houses. You can buy them the cars. You can pay for the fancy degrees. But at the end of the day, blood calls to blood. You are just the resource. I am the source. He picked up a crystal paperweight from my desk and tossed it casually in the air. Patty and I were talking last night. He continued watching the glass spin. She is worried about you. She thinks you are getting too old for this big house. All these stairs. The maintenance. It is a lot for a man in his twilight years. I stayed perfectly still. Is that so? Yeah, Gary said. We were thinking maybe after the wedding it is time for a change. Sell this place. Use the cash to get you a nice little condo in Florida. Something with a nurse on call. And then, well, the rest of the equity could really help Madison and Tyler get started. And Patty deserves to have some fun, don't you think? She has spent 15 years taking care of you, taking care of me. The woman who had not cooked a meal in a decade. The woman whose gambling debts I had erased. That is an interesting plan, I said evenly. Gary smirked. He set the paperweight down. Look, Bob, do not make this hard. You had a good run. You got to play family man. But now the real man is back. I am going to be around a lot more. Holidays, birthdays, Sundays. It is going to be uncomfortable for you. We are just trying to give you a graceful exit. He was evicting me. In my own study, wearing my own suit, the man who had abandoned his daughter was telling me it was time to leave so he could consume the carcass of my life. I stood up. I walked over to him. For a second, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He remembered that I was a Marine before I was an accountant. He remembered that I knew how to break things. But I did not raise my fist. I reached out and smoothed the lapel of his jacket. You are right, Gary, I said softly. I have been thinking the same thing. It is time for a change. I reached into my pocket. Here, I said. You will need a pocket square to complete the look. I pulled out a folded white silk handkerchief, but inside the folds, hidden deep within the fabric, was a device no larger than a stick of gum. It was a high-fidelity digital recorder, the kind I used to use for board meetings. It was already recording. It had a battery life of 48 hours and enough memory to capture a week of conversations. I tucked the handkerchief into the breast pocket of the suit. I patted it gently. Perfect, I said. Gary looked down at the pocket. Thanks, Bob. You really are a servant at heart, aren't you? Always serving the better man. He laughed again and turned back to the mirror. I am going to keep this on, he said. Break it in. I am heading over to meet Tyler for drinks. We have some celebrating to do. By all means, I said. Enjoy the evening. Gary strutted to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. Hey, Bob, yes, don't wait up, he sneered. I waited until I heard the front door close. I waited until I heard the engine of his rusted truck cough to life and fade down the driveway. I walked to the window. I watched the dust settle. He was wearing the wire. He was walking into a bar to meet the other leech, Tyler. Alcohol loosens tongues. Arrogance loosens them even faster. In that pocket right next to his beating heart was the evidence I needed to bury them all. He would brag about the plan. He would laugh about how they were manipulating me. He would admit to the coercion. And the judge would hear every single word. I turned back to my desk. The plastic wrap from the suit was still there, crumpled like a shed skin. I picked it up and threw it in the trash. I did not feel angry anymore. The time for anger had passed. Now I just felt the cold, hard clarity of execution. I looked at the empty hangar. It swayed slightly in the air current from the air conditioner. Wear it in good health, Gary, I whispered to the empty room, because it is the last suit you will ever wear as a free man. I sat down and opened my laptop. I had one more transfer to make. I logged into the trust account, the one I had set up for Madison's future children. It had a balance of $200,000. I clicked on the tab labeled Beneficiaries. I highlighted Madison's name. I hit the backspace key. The name vanished. I typed in a new name, the Wounded Warrior Project. I clicked Confirm. The screen flashed green. Transaction successful. I closed the laptop. The sun had set. The room was dark, but for the first time in 15 years I could see everything clearly. Tomorrow was Monday. The movers were coming. The locks were changing. And somewhere in a bar downtown, Gary was recording his own confession. Let the games begin. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of deceptive sunshine that usually precedes a hurricane. The house was buzzing with a frantic energy that had nothing to do with joy and everything to do with vanity. Madison was pacing the kitchen, complaining about the dark circles under her eyes, claiming the stress of the wedding was ruining her complexion. Patricia was right behind her, nodding sympathetically, looking at me as if I were the cause of their fatigue. This was the moment, the final injection of anesthesia before the surgery. I pulled 2 envelopes from my jacket pocket. They were thick, heavy cardstock, the kind that whispered luxury before you even opened them. I placed them on the marble island next to Madison's untouched green juice. I think you both need a break, I said, keeping my voice warm and concerned. You have been working so hard to make this wedding perfect. I booked you 2 nights at the Sanctuary Spa in the Berkshires. The full package. Massages, facials, mud baths. You leave in an hour. Madison froze. Her eyes went wide. She ripped open the envelope. The Sanctuary. Robert, this place is impossible to get into. It costs like $2,000 a night. I smiled. I pulled some strings. You need to be glowing for the photos on Saturday. Go. Relax. Do not worry about the house. Do not worry about the vendors. I will handle everything here. Patricia looked at me with tears welling in her eyes. Real tears for once. She came around the counter and hugged me. The smell of her expensive perfume bought with my bonus check last year filled my nose. You are the best husband, she whispered. I do not know what I would do without you. You will find out soon enough, I thought. Go pack, I said, gently pulling away. The car service will be here at 10. For the next hour, I watched them scramble. They packed as if they were going to Fashion Week, filling Louis Vuitton duffels with silk robes and designer swimwear. They were giddy. They were laughing. They were already mentally checking out of reality. At 10 o'clock sharp, a black Lincoln Navigator pulled into the driveway. The driver loaded their bags. Madison blew me a kiss from the back seat. Bye, Dad. You're the best. It was the first time in 10 years she had called me Dad without following it up with a request for money. It was also the last time she would ever say it. I waved until the car turned the corner and disappeared behind the hedgerow. The moment the taillights vanished, the smile dropped from my face like a heavy curtain. I turned back to the house. The silence was absolute. It was 10:05 a.m. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for Titan Logistics. "You are clear to approach," I said. They must have been waiting around the block, because 3 minutes later, 2 massive 18-wheelers rolled up the driveway. These were not your average movers. These were white-glove relocation specialists, the kind used by museums and billionaires. They wore uniforms that were cleaner than Gary's best shirt. The foreman, a man named Miller, walked up to me with a tablet. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, "we have the inventory list. We are prioritizing high-value assets and personal property." Correct, I said. "I want to be very specific. If I bought it, it goes. If she bought it, or if it is cheap laminate, it stays. I want the contrast to be visible." Miller nodded. "We will have the ground floor cleared in 3 hours." I stood in the foyer and directed traffic. It was a surgical extraction. I watched them wrap the grand piano in protective padding. That piano cost $60,000. Patricia didn't play. She just used it to display framed photos of herself. "Take it," I said. They moved to the living room. The Persian rugs were rolled up, revealing the bare hardwood underneath. The Eames lounge chair, my favorite reading spot, was carried out. The 75-inch OLED television was unmounted from the wall, leaving a stark rectangular outline of dust where it had been. I walked into the kitchen. This was the hardest part, but also the most necessary. I opened the wine cellar. There were 300 bottles of vintage wine. Bordeaux, Napa Cabernets, rare scotches. Gary had already put a dent in the collection, but the bulk of the value remained. "Pack it all," I ordered. "Leave the 2 bottles of grocery store Chardonnay on the bottom rack." Why, one of the movers asked, confused. "So they have something to drink when they realize their lives are over," I said. By 2:00 p.m. the house had undergone a transformation. It did not look like a home anymore. It looked like a warehouse that was going out of business. In the dining room, the solid mahogany table that seated 12 was gone. In its place, I left the folding card table Patricia had brought into the marriage 15 years ago. It sat there wobbly and scratched, looking pathetic in the center of the grand room. In the living room, the Italian leather sofas were in the truck. All that remained were a few velvet poufs Madison had bought from an online discount store and a beanbag chair that smelled like dog. I went upstairs to the master bedroom. I stripped the bed. The Egyptian cotton sheets, the down comforter, the memory foam mattress, all mine. All paid for by the sweat of my 40-year career. I had the movers take the mattress. I left the box spring. It felt petty, but then I remembered the conversation I had overheard about putting me in the basement. Petty was just a matter of perspective. I went into the closet. My side was already empty. I looked at Patricia's side. Rows of designer dresses, shoes, handbags, tens of thousands of dollars in merchandise. I did not touch a thread of it. Let her keep her costumes. She would need them to maintain the illusion of wealth when she was standing in the unemployment line. The last thing to go was the art. The hallway had been lined with original oil paintings, landscapes of the coast that I had collected over decades. As the movers took them down, the walls looked naked. The hooks remained protruding from the plaster like small metal accusations. At 6:00 p.m., the trucks were full. The foreman handed me the tablet to sign. "We are heading to the storage facility in New Jersey," he said. "You are all set, Mr. Sullivan." I looked around the foyer. The echo was profound. My footsteps clicked loudly on the floor. The house felt cold, stripped of the insulation of wealth. It was just a structure now, a series of rooms connected by drywall and plumbing. I walked into the kitchen one last time. It was the only room with light, as I had instructed the electric company to cut the power to the rest of the house the next day. I placed the envelope on the counter, the one with the eviction notice and the cancellation receipts. I pulled up the single metal folding chair I had saved from the garage. I placed it facing the envelope. I sat down for a moment. I closed my eyes. I tried to feel guilt. I tried to feel sadness for the woman I had once loved. But all I could see was the text message on her phone to Gary, laughing about my stupidity. All I could hear was Madison telling me I was just Robert. I stood up. I was not Robert the husband anymore. I was not Robert the stepdad. I was Robert the ghost. I walked out the back door, locking it behind me. I walked to the front door and keyed the code into the lockbox one last time. I dropped the heavy brass key inside. It made a metallic clink that sounded like a gavel hitting a block. Case closed. I got into my car. The sun was setting, casting long, dying shadows across the lawn. I did not look back at the empty windows. I put the car in drive and headed toward the airport. I had a one-way ticket to Tuscany in my pocket. They had 2 days of massages and cucumber water ahead of them. 2 days of bliss. And then they would come home to the nothingness they had created. I was already 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, sipping a glass of warm whiskey in economy class, when the Lincoln Navigator pulled back into the driveway of the Greenwich estate. I can picture the scene with absolute clarity, not because I was there, but because I had spent 15 years studying the habits of these two women. I knew exactly how this tragedy would play out, beat by beat, scream by scream. It was Wednesday afternoon. Patricia and Madison were stepping out of the car, their skin glowing from 2 days of exfoliation and seaweed wraps that cost more than my first car. They were laughing. Madison was probably checking her phone, expecting to see the final confirmation from the florist for the orchid archway. Patricia was likely instructing the driver to bring the bags to the foyer, expecting to tip him with cash from the emergency jar I kept in the kitchen. They were floating on a cloud of entitlement, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had been incinerated. The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. Usually the house hummed. The pool filter, the air conditioning, the landscape lighting, it all made a low, expensive noise. But today the house was dark. The curtains in the upstairs windows were gone, leaving the glass looking like hollow black eyes staring back at them. Patricia walked up the front steps, first her heels clicking on the stone. She reached for the handle of the front door. It was locked. She frowned. She punched in the code on the smart lock, her birthday. The keypad flashed red. She tried again. Maybe she mistyped it. She punched it in harder this time. Red. Denied. I imagined the confusion starting to curdle into annoyance. She probably called out my name, thinking I was inside playing a joke, or that I had accidentally engaged the deadlock. Robert. Open the door, the code isn't working. Madison walked up behind her, holding a Starbucks cup. Move, Mom. You probably pressed the wrong button. Madison tried her code. The day she graduated high school. Red. Denied. This is the moment the annoyance turned into a cold spike of fear. Because it wasn't just that the door wouldn't open. It was the sound. When you unlock a door in a furnished house, the sound is muffled. When you bang on a door in an empty house, it echoes. It sounds hollow. It sounds like a drum. Madison stepped off the porch and walked to the large bay window of the living room. She cupped her hands against the glass to block out the glare of the afternoon sun. She peered inside. I wish I could have seen her face. I wish I could have seen the moment her brain tried to process the visual data. The living room was gone. The white sofas were gone. The 75-inch television was gone. The rugs were gone. There was nothing but an expanse of hardwood floor that stretched out into the shadows. Mom, she whispered. The house, it's empty. Patricia ran to the window. She gasped, dropping her purse. Her hands scrambled against the glass like a trapped bird. "We've been robbed," she screamed. "Oh my God, Robert. Where is Robert? Call 911, we've been robbed." They didn't understand. A robber takes the TV and the jewelry. A robber doesn't take the curtains. A robber doesn't take the heavy oak dining table. Panic makes people irrational. They ran around the back of the house. They tried the patio doors, locked. They tried the kitchen window, locked. Finally, Madison remembered the spare key hidden inside the fake rock near the garden hose. The one I had told them a dozen times was not secure, the one I had left there specifically for this moment, because I wanted them to get inside. I wanted them to experience the full acoustic terror of the echo. Madison smashed the fake rock against the patio pavers to get the plastic cover off. She jammed the key into the back door. It turned. They burst into the kitchen, breathless, ready to confront intruders. "Hello, is anyone here?" Patricia screamed, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick holder that the movers had left behind because it was broken. Silence answered them. A heavy, dusty silence. They walked through the kitchen. It was unrecognizable. The counters were bare. The coffee maker, the toaster, the mixer, all gone. The refrigerator door was slightly ajar, revealing the dark, empty shelves inside. The only light came from the afternoon sun, slicing through the unadorned windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. And then they saw it. In the center of the kitchen, in the middle of the vast, empty space where the island used to be, crowded with bar stools and fruit bowls, sat a single metal folding chair. It was facing the granite countertop. On the counter lay a thick, manila envelope. It looked like an altar, a shrine to the end of their world. They walked toward it slowly. The clicking of their heels was deafening in the empty room. Patricia reached the envelope first. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open the clasp. She pulled out the documents. The first page was the closing statement from the sale of the property. It was a standard real estate form, but to her it must have looked like a death certificate. It showed the sale date yesterday. It showed the move-out deadline today, 5:00 p.m. It showed the seller, Robert Sullivan. It showed the net proceeds wired to an account they had never seen before. "Sold," she whispered the word, strangling in her throat. He sold the house. Madison grabbed the second stack of papers. These were colorful. They were the receipts from the wedding vendors. The florist. Canceled. Refund issued to cardholder. The caterer. Canceled. Refund issued to cardholder. The venue. Canceled. Deposit forfeited. The band. Canceled. Every single dream, every single orchid, every single lobster tail she had ordered canceled. No, Madison moaned. She leaned against the counter, her legs giving way. No, no, no. The wedding is in 4 days. He can't do this. He can't just cancel it. But there was one more piece of paper in the envelope. A handwritten note on my personal stationery. I had written it calmly sitting at that very counter 2 days ago. Patricia read it out loud, her voice cracking and breaking with every word. Dear Patricia and Madison, you wanted a wedding hosted by the father of the bride. You made it very clear that Gary is the father and I am just the bank. I have decided to respect your wishes. I have removed myself and my bank from the equation. The house has been sold. The new owners take possession at 5:00 p.m. today. You are currently trespassing. The wedding contracts were in my name. Since I am not the father, I have canceled them. Gary, as the real father, is free to rebook them. I have left the contact numbers below. I am sure he will be happy to provide his credit card details. Do not look for me. I am gone. And do not look for the money. It is gone too. Signed, Robert. The scream that tore out of Madison's throat was primal. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was the rage of a parasite that had just been ripped from its host. She swept her arm across the counter, knocking the papers onto the floor. He ruined it. He ruined my life, she shrieked. kicking the folding chair. It clattered loudly across the empty kitchen floor, spinning on its side. Patricia slid down the front of the cabinets until she hit the floor. She sat there, amidst the paperwork, looking around the empty shell of the mansion she thought she owned. She looked at the spot on the wall where her portrait used to hang. It was just a white square now. "Where are we going to sleep?" Patricia whimpered. "Robert, where are we going to sleep?" Her voice echoed up the stairs, bouncing off the walls of the hollow bedrooms, fading into the nothingness I had left behind. Then the front door opened. Heavy footsteps thudded in the foyer. It was Gary. He had finally arrived, probably looking for a cold beer and a place to crash. "Hey," he yelled out. "Why is the TV gone? Did you guys decide to redecorate already?" Madison began to laugh. It was a high, hysterical sound that bordered on madness. "Welcome home, Dad," she screamed at the empty ceiling. "Welcome home." The silence in the kitchen was broken not by a scream, but by a vibration. It was Madison's phone sitting on the bare granite countertop. Then Patricia's phone buzzed. Then Tyler's, who had just walked through the open back door, freezing in his tracks as he surveyed the emptiness. It was a symphony of notifications, a digital firing squad assembling for the execution. I had timed the cancellation emails to go out at exactly 5 o'clock. In the corporate world, 5 o'clock on a Wednesday is when you deliver bad news, so you do not have to deal with the fallout until the next morning. But for them, there would be no next morning. Madison picked up her phone first. Her hand was trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. It was an email from the catering company, the one we had visited just days ago, to upgrade to the lobster and filet mignon. The subject line was in all caps, "Urgent cancellation and outstanding balance." She read it out loud, her voice thin and reedy like a child lost in a supermarket. "Dear Ms. Miller, we have received notification from Mr. Sullivan that he is withdrawing his financial sponsorship of your event, effective immediately. Per the contract signed by you and Mr. Tyler Kvist's, all outstanding balances are due upon cancellation within 72 hours of the event date." She stopped. She swallowed hard. "Read the number," Tyler snapped. He was standing in the doorway, his face pale. He knew what was coming. Madison choked out the figure. $42,580. They are charging us the full amount because the food has already been ordered. They say if we do not wire the funds by tomorrow at noon, they will send it to collections and file a lawsuit for breach of contract. 40 grand. Gary laughed nervously, cracking a knuckle. "That is a mistake. Just call Bob. Tell him to quit playing games." "He is not playing games," Dad, Madison screamed, spinning on him. "He is gone. Do you not understand? He sold the house, he canceled the checks, he is gone." Before the echo of her scream could fade, another notification pinged. This time, it was the florist. The woman who had promised Vogue-worthy orchids. Madison stared at the screen. "Celine says she already ordered the flowers from Thailand. She says they are non-refundable. She is charging the card on file for the remaining $15,000. The card on file. All eyes turned to Tyler. It was his card. The one his parents had co-signed. The one he was so proud to flash around when he thought I was going to reimburse him. Tyler frantically unlocked his phone. He opened his banking app. I can only imagine the color draining from his face as he saw the pending transactions. The venue, the florist, the band, the lighting crew. Everyone was rushing to grab their piece of the pie before the money ran out. No, Tyler whispered. No, no, no. This cannot be happening. That is my parents' money. That is the down payment for our house. He looked up at Madison, and for the first time there was no adoration in his eyes. There was no love. There was only the cold, hard calculation of a man realizing he had made a terrible investment. "You told me he would pay, Tyler," said his voice low and dangerous. "You stood there in the florist shop and told me to swipe the card because Robert always pays. You said he was a pushover. I thought he was." Madison cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining the expensive facial she had just received. He always pays. He has always paid. I do not know why he is doing this. You pushed him too far, Patricia whispered from the floor. She was hugging her knees, rocking back and forth. The suit, the wedding invitation. You humiliated him, Madison. I told you not to push it with the dad thing. Oh, shut up, Mom, Madison yelled. You were the one laughing about it. You were the one who said we could kick him to the curb after the honeymoon. Tyler stepped into the room. He looked at the empty space where the refrigerator used to be. He looked at Gary, who was standing there in his dirty t-shirt, looking useless and bewildered. He looked at Madison, who was now just a girl with a mountain of debt and no daddy to bail her out. My credit score, Tyler said, his voice rising to a shout. Do you know what this is going to do to my credit score? My dad is going to kill me. He co-signed that card on the condition that we use it for emergencies only. This is an emergency, Madison pleaded, reaching out for him. Tyler, baby, we can fix this. We just need to… Tyler cut her off, stepping back from her touch, as if she were contagious. There is no we, Madison. Not anymore. I signed up to marry a Sullivan. I signed up for the house in Greenwich and the trust fund and the security. I did not sign up to marry the daughter of… him. He pointed a shaking finger at Gary. Gary bristled, trying to summon some shred of masculinity. Hey, watch your mouth, kid. That is my daughter you are talking to. Yeah, Tyler sneered. Then you pay for it. You are the father of the bride, right? That is what the invitation says. Mr. Gary Miller. So you pull out your wallet. Gary, and you write the check for $57,000 to cover the lobster and the dead flowers. Go ahead. I am waiting. The room fell silent. The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Gary did not have $57,000. Gary did not have $57. He had a truck that needed a new transmission and a tab at the local dive bar. Tyler let out a harsh, bitter laugh. That is what I thought. You are all frauds. You have been living off that old man's money, acting like you were royalty, and you are nothing. You are absolutely nothing. Tyler turned around. He walked back to the door. Where are you going? Madison screamed, running after him. Tyler, the wedding is in 4 days. Well, what am I supposed to tell people? Tell them the groom came to his senses, Tyler said without looking back. He walked out the door, got into his leased BMW, and peeled out of the driveway. Madison stood in the doorway, watching the taillights disappear, just as I had done hours before. But I had left with dignity. She was left with nothing but a cancellation fee. She turned back to the kitchen. Patricia was sobbing quietly. Gary was looking through the empty cupboards, hoping to find a bottle of liquor that the movers might have missed. Madison looked at her phone again. Another email came through. It was from the wedding planner. Dear Madison, due to non-payment of the final installment, we are releasing your date to another couple on the waiting list. Please note that your deposit is non-refundable. She slid down the doorframe until she hit the floor. She buried her face in her hands. Robert, she whimpered into the darkness of the empty house. Daddy, please, pick up the phone. But the phone she was calling was sitting at the bottom of a trash can in the airport terminal. And the man she was calling was currently ordering a glass of Chianti 4,000 miles away, finally enjoying the silence. I had checked into a suite at the St. Regis in New York City, waiting for my evening flight to Rome. It was a sterile, beautiful room that smelled of starch and expensive lilies, a welcome change from the hollowed-out carcass of the house in Greenwich. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and opened my iPad. I had silenced my phone, but I knew the storm was raging. I just did not know the wind speed until I logged onto Instagram. I had created a burner account years ago to monitor Madison's spending habits, as she often posted her unauthorized purchases before the credit card bill even arrived. Today, her profile was not showcasing designer bags or avocado toast. It was showcasing a tragedy. She was live. The notification said she had 40,000 viewers. I clicked on the video. Madison was sitting on the floor of the empty kitchen I had vacated hours earlier. She had set up her ring light because even in the depths of despair, lighting is paramount. She was wearing a hoodie. I recognized it was mine, an old university sweatshirt she had never touched before today. She had wiped off most of her makeup, leaving just enough mascara smudge under her eyes to suggest hours of weeping. "Hey guys," she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. "I did not want to make this video. I really didn't. But I don't know where else to turn." She paused, looking down at her hands. The comments section was scrolling so fast, it was a blur of broken heart emojis and angry faces. My stepfather, Robert. The man I have called Dad for 15 years. He abandoned us. She looked directly into the camera lens, and for a second, I had to admire the performance. It was Oscar-worthy. He left us with nothing. She continued, a single tear tracking down her cheek. He sold our house without telling us. He canceled my wedding 4 days before the ceremony. He emptied the bank accounts. And the worst part, he did it because he was jealous. I took a sip of water. Jealous. That was the angle. He was jealous that I wanted to reconnect with my biological father, Gary, she sobbed. Gary has been trying so hard to be in my life, and Robert just couldn't handle not being the center of attention. He told me that if I let Gary walk me down the aisle, he would destroy me. I thought he was joking. I didn't think he would actually leave my mom and me homeless. The lie was so audacious it took my breath away. She had surgically removed her own cruelty, excised the insults, and stitched the narrative back together to make me the monster. She didn't mention the demands for the Armani suit. She didn't mention the phrase, "just Robert." She didn't mention the debt she and Tyler had racked up on their own. I watched the comments. The internet mob, that mindless beast that feeds on outrage, was fully awake. What a psycho. This is financial abuse. Dox him. Let's find out where he is. Someone needs to teach this old man a lesson. Madison wiped her nose on her sleeve. I don't care about the money, she lied. I just care that he broke my heart. I feel so unsafe. We are sleeping on the floor tonight. If anyone sees him, please just tell him we are sorry for whatever we did to make him this angry. We just want him to come home. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was not asking for money directly. She was crowdsourcing vengeance. She was painting a target on my back while holding a begging bowl. I closed the iPad. I did not feel anger. I felt a cold, detached satisfaction. In her desperation to destroy me, she had made a fatal tactical error. She had gone public. She had put her lies on the record. In a court of law, a private conversation is hearsay. A live stream with 40,000 witnesses is evidence. She had just handed my lawyer the grounds for a defamation suit that would garnish her wages for the rest of her life. But the internet works faster than the law. I needed to return the rental car before my flight. I had rented a nondescript sedan to avoid drawing attention, but I had forgotten one detail. My face was now on every smartphone in the tri-state area. Madison had posted a photo of me in the next slide, a photo from last Christmas, where I looked stern and unsmiling, fitting her narrative of the cold tyrant. I took the elevator down to the garage. The valet brought the car around. He looked at me funny. He held the keys a second too long. You look like that guy, the valet said, narrowing his eyes. The one on TikTok. The dad who canceled the wedding. I took the keys from his hand. I have a common face, I said calmly. I got into the car and drove out onto the street. I was only a few blocks from the hotel when the red light stopped me at an intersection. The city was crowded. People were glued to their phones. I saw a group of teenagers on the corner. One of them looked up. He pointed. He shouted something to his friends. They looked at their phones, then at me. Recognition dawned on their faces. It wasn't the look of fans. It was the look of hunters. "That's him," the kid screamed. "That's the deadbeat." I stared straight ahead. The light was still red. One of the kids had a cup of something in his hand. A thick red smoothie, or maybe a slushie. He ran into the street. For Madison, he yelled and he hurled the cup at my car. It exploded against the driver's side window. Thick red liquid splattered across the glass, dripping down like a horror movie special effect. It blocked my view of the side mirror. The other kids cheered. They had their phones out, filming. They were capturing their moment of heroism, attacking an old man in a sedan because a girl on the internet cried. I did not roll down the window. I did not yell. I did not get out to confront them. That is what they wanted. They wanted the angry tyrant. They wanted the viral clip of me losing my temper. The light turned green. I turned on the windshield wipers. The rubber blades dragged the red sludge across the glass, smearing it, before clearing a small arc of visibility. I pressed the accelerator and drove through the intersection. I kept my pulse steady. I checked my rearview mirror. The kids were high-fiving. They thought they had won. They thought they had shamed me. I drove the remaining miles to the airport with the red stain drying on the side of the car. People honked. People stared. I was a pariah in a city I had helped build. When I pulled into the rental return lane, the attendant walked around the car. He stopped when he saw the mess. "What happened here?" he asked, grimacing. "A misunderstanding," I said. I handed him the keys. "Put the cleaning fee on the card." I grabbed my suitcase and walked toward the terminal. I could feel the eyes of people on me. I kept my head high. Let them stare. Let them hate. They were watching a movie where they had missed the first act. They didn't know the ending yet. I found a quiet corner in the first-class lounge and called Arthur Blackwood. "Did you see it?" Arthur asked. His voice was gravelly, sounding like he was suppressing a cough or a laugh. "I saw it," I said, "and I saw the paint on my car." "Good," Arthur said. "That is assault and property damage incited by a public figure. We just added 2 zeros to the countersuit settlement figure." "Are you safe? I am boarding in an hour," I said. "Arthur, I want you to preserve that video. Download it. Save the comments. Save the threats." "Way ahead of you," Robert Arthur replied. "She is digging her own grave with a ring light. By the way, the florist called my office. She is threatening to sue you for fraud." "Let her," I said. "The contract is in Tyler's name. I am just a third party who decided not to give a gift. There is no law against being a disappointing stepfather." Arthur laughed. "You are a cold son of a gun, Sullivan. Enjoy Italy. When you land, I will have the draft of the restraining order ready for your review." I hung up. I looked out the window at the runway. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the tarmac. I was leaving the chaos behind. I was leaving the red paint and the screaming teenagers and the weeping influencer. I opened my iPad one last time. I went back to Madison's profile. The video had ended. She had posted a story update. It was a selfie of her and Patricia holding candles in the dark kitchen. The caption read, "The darkness is scary, but our love is brighter. #Survivor. #Justice for Madison." I scrolled down to the comments. Amidst the sea of support, I saw one comment from a user named Gary the Legend. "Don't worry, baby girl. Daddy is here. We will make him pay." I smiled. Gary had taken the bait. He was stepping into the role of the protector, the provider, the hero. He was stepping right into the bear trap. I turned off the iPad. I walked to the gate. The flight attendant scanned my boarding pass. "Have a pleasant flight, Mr. Sullivan," she said. I looked at her. For the first time in days, I felt the muscles in my face relax into a genuine smile. "Oh, I will," I said. "I really will." I walked down the jet bridge. I was leaving the country a villain. I knew that when I returned, I would be the plaintiff. But for now, let them have their internet points. Let them have their viral moment. Because while they were fighting for likes, I was fighting for my life. And I had just won the most important battle without firing a single shot. The digital mob was baying for blood on the internet, but I knew that virtual threats rarely stayed virtual for long, especially not when alcohol was involved. I had rented a small, unassuming townhouse on the outskirts of the city, a place listed under a shell company that no one could trace back to Robert Sullivan. Or so I thought. But rage has a way of sharpening the senses, and Gary had likely spent the last few hours terrorizing my former neighbors until one of them, terrified and annoyed, gave up the license plate number of my rental car. It was just past midnight when I heard it. The sound of a truck engine roaring down the quiet street, followed by the screech of tires mounting the curb. I was sitting in the living room in the dark. I had been expecting this. In fact, I was counting on it. I checked the app on my phone. The notification was green. System armed. Camera 1 recording. Camera 2 recording. I slipped the phone into my pocket and stood up. I adjusted the collar of my shirt. I stood in the center of the room, directly in the line of sight of the wide-angle lens hidden in the bookshelf. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs, letting my heart rate settle. Then came the pounding, a heavy rhythmic thudding against the front door that shook the frame. "Open up, you coward!" Gary's voice was slurred, thick with cheap whiskey and misplaced righteousness. "Open the door, Bob. I know you are in there." I did not move. I did not call out. I simply waited. The pounding stopped for a second, replaced by the sound of glass shattering. He had thrown a landscaping brick through the side window. A hand reached in, fumbling for the lock. The door swung open with a crash, hitting the wall. Gary stumbled into the foyer. He looked like a wreck. His eyes were bloodshot. His shirt was stained with sweat, and he was swaying on his feet. He held a baseball bat in one hand, dragging it across the floorboards with a menacing scrape. "There you are," he sneered, squinting into the darkness. "Sitting there like a king while my daughter cries her eyes out." He took a step toward me, raising the bat. "You think you are tough, huh? You think you can just cut people off? You think money makes you a man?" I looked at him. I looked at his sloppy stance, his unguarded chin, the way his weight was all on his heels. Decades ago, before I wore suits and looked at spreadsheets, I wore a different uniform. I was a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. I did 2 tours overseas. I learned hand-to-hand combat from men who treated violence as a science. I knew exactly how to disarm a man with a bat. I knew how to shatter a kneecap with a single kick. I knew how to put Gary on the floor and ensure he never walked without a limp again. My muscles tensed. The instinct to strike to neutralize the threat was overwhelming. It would have been easy. It would have been satisfying. But I forced my hands to stay at my sides. I forced my muscles to relax. If I fought back, it was a brawl. It was a dispute between 2 men. It was mutual combat. But if I stood still, if I let him attack an unarmed senior citizen in his own home, that was a felony. That was assault with a deadly weapon. That was prison time. I made the calculation in a split second. I chose the pain. "Gary," I said, keeping my voice calm and loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Please leave. You are trespassing. I do not want any trouble." "Trouble," Gary laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "You are the trouble, Bob, and I am the solution." He swung. He didn't use the bat, thank God. Even in his drunken rage, perhaps some part of him realized that was murder. Instead, he dropped the bat and lunged at me with his fists. His first punch caught me on the jaw. It was a sloppy looping hook, but it had the weight of a 200-pound man behind it. My head snapped back. I tasted copper. I felt my lips split against my teeth. I stumbled back, feigning more weakness than I felt. I fell against the bookshelf, knocking a vase to the floor. "Please," I said, holding up my hands, in a defensive posture, making sure not to strike back. "Gary, stop. You are drunk." "Shut up," he screamed. He grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and slammed me against the wall. He raised his fist again. "This is for Madison," he yelled. He struck me again, this time in the ribs. I grunted. The pain was sharp, breathless. I felt a bruise blooming instantly. I let myself slide down the wall to the floor. I curled into a ball, protecting my head. "Is that all you got?" he spat, kicking me in the thigh. "You are pathetic. You are weak." I stayed down. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. I knew the silent alarm had been triggered the moment the glass broke. The local precinct had a response time of under 5 minutes. Gary was panting now, standing over me, feeling like a conqueror. He thought he had won. He thought he had taught me a lesson. "See how it feels," he taunted. "See how it feels to be powerless." I looked up at him through the darkness. My jaw throbbed and my ribs burned, but my mind was crystal clear. "I am not the one who is powerless, Gary," I whispered. Before he could process what I meant, the room was suddenly bathed in red and blue light. The siren didn't chirp until the cruiser was right outside the door, a tactical silence. Gary froze. He looked at the open door. He looked at the flashing lights reflecting off the broken glass. Confusion washed over his face. He dropped his hands. "Police, show me your hands." 2 officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. They saw a shattered window. They saw a baseball bat on the floor. They saw an elderly man bleeding on the ground. And they saw a drunk man standing over him. It was not a difficult scene to interpret. "Get on the ground, now!" Gary blinked, his brain struggling to catch up. "Wait, no, you don't understand." He started it. "He stole my daughter's wedding." "Get on the ground," the officer roared, advancing. Gary tried to step back, raising his hands in a clumsy gesture. "I am the father. I am just defending my family." The officer didn't care about family dynamics. He cared about the threat. He tackled Gary to the floor. I watched from my spot against the wall as they handcuffed him. I watched as they read him his rights. I watched as the arrogance drained out of him, replaced by the terrified realization of what he had done. "You are under arrest for breaking and entering assault and battery," the officer recited. Gary looked at me as they hauled him up. His eyes were wide, pleading now. Bob, tell them. Tell them it was just a misunderstanding. Bob, I can't go to jail. I have a record. They will violate my parole." I slowly pulled myself up, using the bookshelf for support. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. I looked at the officer. "I want to press charges," I said clearly. "And I have the entire incident on video." Gary's knees buckled. He knew. In that moment, he finally knew. He hadn't walked into a fight. He had walked into a trap. As they dragged him out the door, kicking and screaming about his rights, I reached into my pocket and stopped the recording. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. My face was swelling. My shirt was torn. I looked like a victim. But as I stared at my reflection, I didn't see a victim. I saw a man who had just traded a split lip for his enemy's freedom. It was a fair trade. The paramedic arrived a few minutes later. He shone a light in my eyes. "You took a pretty good beating, sir," he said gently. "We should take you to the hospital." I nodded. "Yes. Let's go." I wanted the medical report. I wanted the x-rays. I wanted every single bruise documented, time-stamped, and filed. Madison wanted a story for her followers. I was about to give her one. As I lay on the stretcher in the back of the ambulance, I pulled out my phone. I uploaded the video file to the cloud. I sent a copy to Arthur Blackwood with a 2-word message. "Execute him." Arthur replied instantly. "Received. I will have the arraignment judge look at this before breakfast. He is not getting bail." I closed my eyes as the ambulance pulled away. The pain in my ribs was a dull ache, but the relief in my chest was overwhelming. Gary was gone. The real dad was behind bars. Now it was just Madison and Patricia left on the battlefield, and they were about to realize that their heavy hitter, their protector, their hero was nothing more than collateral damage in a war they never should have started. I listened to the siren wailing in the night. To anyone else, it sounded like an emergency. To me, it sounded like victory. Saturday came, but the sun did not. The forecast I had checked from the comfort of my hotel balcony in Rome predicted a torrential downpour for Connecticut, and for once the weathermen were absolutely correct. It was the kind of rain that feels personal, a relentless, icy sheet of water that turns the world gray and miserable. It was the perfect weather for a funeral, which was appropriate because a marriage was about to die before it even took its first breath. I was not there, of course. I was thousands of miles away, enjoying a plate of truffle pasta. But thanks to the digital age and the voracious appetite of the internet, I saw every frame of the disaster. Madison, in her infinite need for attention, had insisted on live streaming the ceremony, hoping to garner sympathy points for her bravery in the face of adversity. She thought the world would see a tragic heroine making the best of a bad situation. Instead, they tuned in to watch a train wreck. The venue had changed. Gone were the vineyards and the crystal chandeliers. Gone was the vintage Rolls-Royce. The wedding took place in the backyard of Tyler's parents' house in a neighborhood that Madison had previously referred to as the Trenches. It was a small, cramped patch of dying grass surrounded by a chain-link fence that leaned precariously to the left. A blue plastic tarp had been strung up between two oak trees to serve as the altar, flapping violently in the wind like a distress signal. The guest list had decimated. 200 people were invited. 12 showed up. Most were Tyler's relatives holding cans of cheap beer and looking uncomfortable in ill-fitting suits. The high society friends Madison had cultivated, the influencers, the models. They were nowhere to be seen. They smelled the poverty and the scandal, and they scattered like roaches when the lights turn on. The video feed was shaky, held by Patricia, whose hands were trembling. I could hear the wind howling into the microphone, distorting the audio, but the image was crystal clear. Madison stepped out of the back door of the house. She was wearing the dress, the $10,000 gown that I had refused to pay for, which meant she had likely put it on another credit card that was about to bounce. It was a beautiful dress, designed for a cathedral, not a swamp. As soon as her satin heel touched the ground, she sank. The mud was thick, dark, and hungry. It swallowed her shoe instantly. She stumbled, grabbing the doorframe for balance. The hem of the pristine white lace dragged through a puddle of oil-slicked rainwater. A brown stain began to wick up the fabric, climbing higher with every step. There was no music. The boombox they had set up had shorted out 10 minutes prior due to the rain. There was only the sound of the storm and the distant barking of a neighbor's dog. She walked down the makeshift aisle, which was really just a path of flattened cardboard boxes that were rapidly disintegrating into pulp. Her hair, which she had probably spent hours curling, was plastered to her skull. Her mascara was running in black rivets down her cheeks. She looked less like a bride and more like the survivor of a shipwreck. Tyler was waiting for her under the blue tarp. He looked miserable. His cheap suit was soaked through, clinging to his frame. He wasn't looking at Madison with love. He was looking at her with the cold, hard realization of what his life had become. He was looking at the mud on her dress. He was looking at the chain-link fence. He was looking at his future, and he hated it. Madison reached the altar. She was shivering violently. She reached out to take Tyler's hands, but he kept them jammed in his pockets. "Let's just get this over with," Tyler muttered. The microphone on Patricia's phone picked it up clearly. The officiant, a friend of Tyler's who had gotten ordained online for $20, cleared his throat. He opened a soggy notebook. "We are gathered here today," he began shouting over the thunder, "to join this man and this woman." He didn't get to finish the sentence. A gust of wind ripped one of the corners of the blue tarp loose. It whipped down, slapping Tyler across the face with a wet, heavy thwack. It dumped a gallon of collected rainwater directly onto his head. That was the breaking point. It wasn't the debt. It wasn't the arrest of his father-in-law. It was the water. It was the sheer, undeniable squalor of the moment. Tyler wiped the water from his eyes. He looked at Madison, who was sobbing silently, her makeup a horror show of black streaks. "I can't do this," he said. Madison froze. "What, I can't do this?" Tyler repeated louder this time. "Look at this, Madison. Look at us. We are standing in the mud. My dad is inside watching wrestling because he thinks this is a joke. Your dad is in jail. Your mom is homeless. And you," he gestured at her ruined dress, "you are not the prize anymore, Maddie. You were supposed to come with a house. You were supposed to come with a trust fund. You were supposed to come with a life." Madison gasped, a sound of pure shock. "Tyler, how can you say that? You love me, do I?" Tyler laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that cut through the rain. "Or did I love the trips to St. Bart's? Did I love the dinners at Le Bernardin? Did I love the fact that your stepdad paid for my car insurance?" He stepped out from under the broken tarp, letting the rain soak him completely. "I am 27 years old. Madison. I am almost 100 grand in debt because of this week alone. I have creditors calling my mother. And for what? To live in a basement apartment with you and listen to you complain that you deserve better." He shook his head. "I am done. I am cutting my losses." He turned around and started walking back toward the house. Tyler Madison screamed. She tried to run after him, but her dress was too heavy, weighed down by pounds of mud and water. She tripped. She fell face first into the sludge. It was a moment of absolute degradation. The princess in the mud. Tyler didn't stop. He didn't look back. He walked into the house and slammed the door. Patricia dropped the phone. The camera angle skewed sideways, filming the gray sky and the wet grass, but the audio kept rolling. I could hear Madison screaming. It wasn't a scream of heartbreak. It was the scream of a child who had been told no for the first time in her life and couldn't process the reality of it. "Come back," she shrieked, her voice raw. "You can't leave me. I am a Sullivan. I am a Sullivan." But she wasn't a Sullivan. She never was. She was a Miller. And now she was just a girl alone in the rain, covered in dirt, realizing that without my checkbook, she was completely and utterly invisible. The live stream ended abruptly, likely because the phone battery died, or Patricia finally realized the world had seen enough. I closed my laptop. The waiter placed a fresh espresso on my table. "Is everything all right, Signora?" he asked, noticing I had been staring at the screen. "Everything is perfect," I replied. I took a sip of the coffee. It was rich, dark, and bitter, just like justice. The wedding was over. The marriage was dead. The alliance of parasites had turned on each other just as I knew they would. When you starve a pack of wolves, they don't hunt together. They eat the weakest member. Tyler had escaped, but he was ruined financially. Madison was destroyed socially and emotionally. Patricia was watching her retirement plan dissolve in the rain. I sat back in my chair and watched the Roman sunset. It was beautiful. Gold and orange light bathed the ancient city. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel the crushing weight of expectation on my chest. I didn't feel the anxiety of the next bill. I was free. But I wasn't finished. There was one act left. The legal cleanup. The final nail in the coffin. Because while they were drowning in the mud, I still had a court date to attend. And I intended to arrive dry, dressed in a custom suit, ready to reclaim the last thing they had tried to take from me. My name. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a scent I had associated with corporate mergers for 40 years, but today it smelled like the final act of a tragedy. I sat at the defendant's table wearing a navy blue bespoke suit I had picked up in Milan. My skin was tanned from the Roman sun, and my hands were steady. Across the aisle, the scene was very different. Patricia sat hunched over, wearing a black dress that looked 2 sizes too big, likely something she had pulled from a discount rack after I had donated her entire wardrobe to charity. She looked aged, her face drawn and pale, the result of a week spent in a motel room, with a daughter who had lost her mind and a fiancé who was currently awaiting trial. Next to her sat her lawyer, Mr. Sterling. He was exactly what I expected. A vulture in a cheap suit, the kind of attorney who chased ambulances and advertised on the back of bus stop benches. He was tapping his pen aggressively, trying to intimidate me. He didn't know that I had faced down federal regulators and hostile takeovers. A man like Sterling was not a predator to me. He was a snack. My lawyer, Arthur Blackwood, sat next to me. He was silent. He didn't tap his pen. He didn't shuffle papers. He sat with the stillness of a cobra waiting to strike. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Harrison entered. She was a woman in her 60s, with eyes that had seen every lie a human being could tell. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the 2 parties. "Mr. Sterling, you may begin," she said, sounding bored already. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked to the center of the room and began his performance. "Your Honor," he boomed, gesturing theatrically at Patricia. "We are here today to rectify a gross injustice. My client, a devoted wife of 15 years, has been the victim of financial abuse, abandonment, and cruelty. Her husband, Mr. Sullivan, secretly sold their marital home, liquidated their joint assets, and fled the country, leaving her destitute. We are asking for an immediate freezing of all Mr. Sullivan's assets, spousal support, in the amount of $10,000 a month, and 50% of the marital estate, including his retirement accounts." Patricia dabbed her eyes with a tissue. It was a nice touch. Sterling continued. "Mr. Sullivan claims there is a post-nuptial agreement. We argue that this document was signed under duress. Mrs. Sullivan was coerced into signing it without proper legal representation. She was manipulated by a man who held all the financial power. Therefore, the document is void, and she is entitled to half of everything." He sat down, looking smug. He thought he had made a compelling case for the poor, helpless housewife. Arthur Blackwood stood up slowly. He didn't walk to the center of the room. He stayed by the table. "Your Honor," Arthur said, his voice low and gravelly, "we are not here to debate feelings. We are here to debate facts." Arthur picked up a single document. "Exhibit A," he said. "The post-nuptial agreement. It was signed 5 years ago. It was notarized. And contrary to Mr. Sterling's claim of duress, it was reviewed by independent counsel at the time." Sterling jumped up. "Objection. The counsel was paid for by Mr. Sullivan, overruled," the judge said. "Continue, Mr. Blackwood." Arthur walked toward the judge. "The reason for this agreement is relevant, Your Honor. Mr. Sterling claims his client was manipulated. The truth is, Mrs. Sullivan had incurred $150,000 in gambling debts." A murmur went through the courtroom. Patricia froze. She hadn't told her lawyer about that. Arthur placed a stack of bank statements on the judge's bench. "These are records from 3 casinos in Atlantic City. These are the withdrawal slips from the joint savings account. And this is the wire transfer from Mr. Sullivan paying off a loan shark to prevent physical harm to his wife. Mr. Sullivan agreed to pay this debt on one condition, that she waive her rights to his premarital assets to protect his financial future from her addiction. That is not duress, Your Honor. That is a bailout." Patricia's face turned bright red. Sterling looked at her, whispering furiously, "Why didn't you tell me this?" But Arthur wasn't done. However, Arthur continued, turning to face Patricia. We are not just relying on the gambling. We are relying on the conspiracy to defraud clause within the agreement. He walked back to our table and picked up a small USB drive. Clause 4 Section B states that if the spouse engages in any act to conspire against the financial interests of the primary earner or attempts to transfer assets to a third party through deception, the agreement is binding and all spousal support is forfeited. Sterling scoffed. Conspiracy? That is a stretch. My client has been nothing but a loyal wife. Arthur smiled. It was a terrifying expression. Your Honor, I would like to introduce Exhibit C, a digital audio recording taken on the Friday before the scheduled wedding. I watched Patricia. She looked confused. She didn't know about the recording. She was racking her brain trying to remember what she had said. Arthur plugged the drive into the court's AV system. This recording was captured on a device legally placed within the personal property of Mr. Sullivan, specifically inside the pocket of a suit jacket he loaned to Mr. Gary Miller. Gary's name hit Patricia like a physical blow. She went pale. Arthur pressed play. The courtroom speakers crackled, and then clear as day, Gary's voice filled the room. Man, I love this room. Smells like money. Then came the sound of fabric rustling. Patty and I were talking last night. She is worried about you. She thinks you are getting too old for this big house. I watched the judge's face. Her eyebrows lifted. The recording continued. Gary's voice was arrogant, mocking. We were thinking maybe after the wedding it is time for a change. Sell this place. Use the cash to get you a nice little condo in Florida. And then, well, the rest of the equity could really help Madison and Tyler get started. And Patty deserves to have some fun, don't you think? Patricia put her hands over her mouth. She was shaking her head. Then came the kill shot. The part of the recording Arthur had enhanced to ensure clarity. It was from later that night, recorded when Gary met Tyler at the bar. The old fool bought it hook, line, and sinker. Patty has him wrapped around her finger. She says once the honeymoon is paid for, she is going to file for divorce anyway. We just need to get him to liquidate the house first, so it becomes cash. Then we take half. It's the perfect retirement plan. Silence. Absolute dead silence. The recording ended. Arthur looked at the judge. Your Honor, this is a recording of Mr. Gary Miller, the man Mrs. Sullivan insisted on including in the wedding party, admitting to a conspiracy with Mrs. Sullivan to defraud my client. They planned to divorce him after using his funds for the wedding and stealing his home equity. Sterling sat down. He didn't say a word. He closed his folder. He knew when a ship had sunk. Patricia stood up. That is a lie. That is just Gary talking. I never said that. Sit down, Mrs. Sullivan, the judge barked. Judge Harrison looked at me. Then she looked at Patricia. The disgust on her face was palpable. I have heard enough, the judge said. She didn't even need to recess. The claim of duress is denied. The post-nuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. Furthermore, based on the evidence of conspiracy to defraud, I am granting Mr. Sullivan's motion to dismiss the request for spousal support with prejudice. She banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Mrs. Sullivan, you are awarded nothing. You are responsible for your own legal fees, Mr. Sterling. I suggest you get payment up front because there are no assets here to attach. Dismissed. Patricia let out a wail that echoed off the mahogany walls. She grabbed Sterling's arm, but he pulled away from her, packing his briefcase with aggressive speed. You said we would win, Patricia screamed at him. You said I would get the house. I didn't know you were planning a heist with your ex-husband, Sterling snapped. Good luck, Mrs. Sullivan. Do not call my office. I stood up. Arthur shook my hand. Well done, Arthur, I said. I buttoned my jacket and turned to leave. I had to walk past her table. Patricia looked up at me. Her eyes were red, her makeup smeared. She looked old. For the first time, I saw her not as the beautiful woman I married, but as the tired, desperate gambler she really was. "Robert," she whispered. "Robert, please. I have nowhere to go. Madison is staying on a friend's couch. I can't live in a motel." I stopped. I looked down at her. "You have Gary," I said softly. "He is in jail," she sobbed. "You put him there." "Then wait for him," I said. "You two deserve each other." I walked out of the courtroom doors. The hallway was bright and quiet. I walked past the vending machines where Madison was sitting, looking at her phone, waiting for the news that Mommy had won the lottery. She looked up when she saw me. She stood up, hopeful. "Dad," she asked. I kept walking. I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out into the sunlight. The air was fresh. It didn't smell like floor wax anymore. It smelled like freedom. I had my name back. I had my dignity back. And now I had one last meeting to attend. A meeting with a young woman who thought she was a victim, but was about to learn that the only trust fund she had left was the one I was about to incinerate. I walked out of the courthouse and down the wide limestone steps, the weight of the last few weeks lifting off my shoulders with every stride. The air was crisp, the kind of clear, sharp afternoon that usually signals a new season. I signaled for a taxi ready to head to the airport and put an ocean between me and the wreckage of the Sullivan family. But before I could reach the curb, I heard the sound of running footsteps behind me. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. The desperate, uneven clacking of heels on pavement was a rhythm I had become all too familiar with. It was Madison. Of course it was. Patricia was likely still inside, weeping into her lawyer's cheap suit. But Madison was young enough to still believe that tears could fix broken concrete. She caught up to me breathless, her face flushed. She looked nothing like the polished influencer who had sneered at me across the dinner table at Le Bernardin. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes were swollen, and she was wearing a coat that looked like it hadn't been dry cleaned in a month. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight and frantic. "Please," she gasped. "Please don't go, we need to talk." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. I didn't shake it off. I just looked at it until she felt the coldness of my stare and pulled it back, retreating into herself. "I have a flight to catch, Madison," I said, my voice even. "Just 5 minutes," she pleaded, tears instantly filling her eyes. "You owe me that, don't you? After 15 years, you can't just erase me, Dad. I'm your daughter." I motioned to a stone bench near a dry fountain in the plaza. "Sit," I said. She sat down, looking small and pathetic. I remained standing. I wanted the height advantage. I wanted her to have to look up at the man she had looked down on for so long. "I didn't mean it," she started, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The video, the live stream. Mom made me do it. She said it was the only way to get you to come back. And Gary threatened me. He said if I didn't go along with the real dad narrative, he would leave again. I was scared, Robert. I was just a scared little girl wanting her daddy's approval. You know how I get. I'm stupid sometimes. But I love you. You're the only father I've ever known." She reached out for my hand again. "I broke up with Tyler," she sniffled. "He was a gold digger. You were right about him. And Mom. I'm done with her. I'm moving out. I want to start over. But I can't do it alone. I have nowhere to go. I have debts, Robert. Scary debts. Please. I know you're angry, but you're not cruel. You wouldn't let your little girl starve." I watched her performance. It was good. It was better than the live stream. But the problem with liars is that they assume everyone else has amnesia. She assumed I had forgotten the smirk when she handed me the invitation. She assumed I had forgotten the "just Robert" comment. I reached into my briefcase. I saw her eyes flicker down to the leather bag. A spark of hope ignited in them. She thought I was reaching for the checkbook. She thought the ATM was reopening for business. I pulled out a thick blue binder. It wasn't a checkbook. It was a trust document. "Do you know what this is?" I asked, holding it up. She shook her head, wiping her nose. "No. This," I said, tapping the cover, "is the Madison Sullivan Education and Wedding Trust. I set this up 10 years ago, right after I sold my first company. I deposited a lump sum into a high-yield account. I wanted to make sure that no matter what happened to me, you would always have a safety net." Her eyes widened. She sat up straighter. "A trust," she whispered. "How much is in it?" I opened the binder to the financial summary page. I pointed to the bottom line. $500,000, I read. $500,000. I heard her intake of breath. It was the sound of salvation. I could see the wheels turning in her head. $500,000 would pay off the florist, the caterer, the credit cards, and still leave enough for a down payment on a condo. She was already spending the money in her mind. She was already imagining the comeback video she would post. "Oh my God. Dad." She breathed a smile, breaking through the tears. "I knew it. I knew you loved me. Thank you. Thank you so much. This changes everything." She reached for the binder. I pulled it back. "Sit down, Madison," I said sharply. "I am not finished." She froze her hand, hovering in the air. "This trust is not a gift," I explained, flipping the pages. "It is a contract. And like all contracts, it has conditions. I wrote these conditions myself to ensure that the money would nurture a responsible adult, not enable a spoiled child." I turned to page 12. Clause A, I read. The education stipulation. The beneficiary must provide proof of graduation from an accredited 4-year university with a GPA of 3.0 or higher. I looked at her over the rim of the binder. "You told us you graduated from NYU 2 years ago," I said. "You posted photos in a cap and gown. We had a dinner. I gave you a diamond bracelet." She looked down, picking at a loose thread on her coat. "Yeah, well, I did graduate. Obviously." I pulled a letter from the back of the binder. It was on NYU letterhead. "This is a response from the registrar's office," I said. "I requested a copy of your transcript to verify the trust requirements. It turns out, Madison, you didn't graduate. You dropped out sophomore year to pursue your influencer career. You used the tuition money I sent you to buy Botox and followers. You forged the diploma you showed your mother." Her face went pale. "Robert, I can explain." "There is nothing to explain," I cut her off. "You stole tuition money. That is fraud. But I was willing to overlook that. I was willing to waive the education clause if you had passed the second condition." I turned the page. Clause B. I said, my voice dropping an octave. "The character stipulation." I began to read the legal text aloud. "The funds shall be released in full on the day of the beneficiary's wedding, provided that the current legal guardian and stepfather, Robert Sullivan, is acknowledged, respected, and honored as the father of the bride during the ceremony and planning process. Any act of public humiliation, disavowal of relationship, or malicious intent towards the grantor will result in the immediate revocation of the trust." I closed the binder with a snap. "You had one job, Madison. You didn't have to be a scholar. You just had to be a decent human being. You just had to treat the man who raised you with a fraction of the respect you gave to a stranger who knocked up your mother and left. But you couldn't do it, could you? You had to make a point. You had to tell the world I was just Robert. You had to wipe me out of the picture because I didn't fit your aesthetic." Madison was shaking now, not from cold, but from terror. "Dad, please," she begged, falling to her knees on the pavement. "I'm sorry. I'll fix it. We can do another wedding. I'll post a retraction. I'll tell everyone you're the best father in the world. Just give me another chance. I can't live like this. I have nothing." I looked at her. I saw the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders, but then I saw the woman who had laughed while I sold my home. I saw the woman who had stood by while I was assaulted in the media. I took a gold pen from my pocket. It is too late for retractions, Madison. The trust has a final clause. If the conditions are not met by the wedding date, the grantor has the sole discretion to redirect the funds. I placed the binder on the stone bench. I opened it to the beneficiary page. I crossed out Madison Miller. The scratching of the pen was loud in the silence between us. Madison watched paralyzed as I wrote in the new recipient. The National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. I signed my name at the bottom. "No," she screamed, lunging for the book. "You can't. That's my money. You can't give it to strangers." I stood up, holding the binder out of her reach. "It was never your money, Madison. It was my money. And now it is going to men and women who actually know the meaning of sacrifice. It is going to people who have been beaten down by life, but still have honor. It is going to people who would never spit in the face of the hand that feeds them." I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the signed page. I hit send. "It is done," I said. "My lawyer has the digital copy. The transfer is already initiated. The account is empty." Madison collapsed onto the concrete. She didn't cry this time. She made a sound like a wounded animal, a guttural keen of absolute despair. She curled into a ball, clutching her stomach as if she had been punched. The reality was finally setting in. The $500,000. The life raft, the future, the easy way out was gone, vaporized by her own arrogance. I looked down at her one last time. "You wanted to be independent, Madison. You wanted to cut ties with the ATM. Well, congratulations. You are finally free. You are a self-made woman now. Go make yourself." I turned and walked toward the taxi that had just pulled up to the curb. "Robert," she wailed behind me. "Daddy, please don't leave me here." I opened the car door. I paused and looked back. She was a heap of dirty fabric on the ground, surrounded by pigeons pecking at the dry fountain. "Goodbye, Madison," I said. I got in the car and slammed the door. "Driver JFK Airport," I said. "International Terminal." As the taxi pulled away, merging into the traffic of the busy city, I didn't look back. I took the SIM card out of my phone and snapped it in half. I dropped the pieces into the ashtray. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. The engine hummed beneath me. For the first time in 15 years, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of peace. It was full of the future. And somewhere in the city behind me, a check for $500,000 was clearing, buying warm beds and hot meals for soldiers who had been forgotten. It was the best investment I had ever made. 6 months is a long time in the world of finance, but in Tuscany, it feels like a single afternoon. The light here is different. It is softer, more forgiving than the harsh gray glare of Connecticut. It touches the rolling hills of the vineyard with a golden warmth that seeps into your bones and makes you forget that you were ever cold. I sat on the stone terrace of the farmhouse I had purchased with a fraction of the money I saved from the trust fund. The air smelled of rosemary, drying earth, and the heavy, sweet scent of ripening grapes. There was no noise here. No one was screaming for a credit card. No one was demanding an upgrade to a suite. No one was asking me to shrink myself so they could feel bigger. The only sound was the wind rustling through the olive trees and the distant tractor of my neighbor, an old man named Giovanni, who knew nothing about my past and cared only about the quality of my soil. I poured myself a glass of Sangiovese. It was a deep ruby red harvested from the very vines that stretched out before me. I took a sip. It tasted of dark cherries and leather, a complex flavor that required patience to appreciate. It was the taste of a life that was finally truly mine. I often thought about the life I had left behind, but not with longing. I thought about it the way a survivor of a shipwreck thinks about the ocean, with a healthy respect for its danger and a profound gratitude to be on dry land. Arthur Blackwood kept me updated, of course. He sent me weekly emails, brief and clinical, detailing the collapse of the Miller Empire. Gary was currently a resident of the state penitentiary. He had taken a plea deal for the assault and breaking and entering charges to avoid a longer sentence for the fraud conspiracy. 3 years. He was finally getting the free housing and meals he had always felt entitled to. I imagined he was the king of the cell block, telling stories to anyone who would listen about how he almost took down a millionaire, never realizing that he was the one who had been played. Patricia was working the lunch shift at a diner in New Jersey. Arthur had sent me a photo taken by a private investigator. She looked tired. Her hair was graying at the roots, the expensive dye jobs a thing of the past. She was wearing an apron and sensible shoes, wiping down a table while a customer yelled at her about cold coffee. It was a cruel, poetic justice. She had spent 15 years treating me like a servant, and now she was serving others for minimum wage. And Madison, my former stepdaughter, the girl who wanted to be famous. She got her wish in a way. The live stream of her meltdown in the mud had gone viral, but not the way she wanted. She became a meme, the face of entitlement. She had tried to rebrand herself as a victim, launching a GoFundMe to rebuild her life. But the internet is a fickle beast. They mocked her. They dug up her old posts, flaunting my wealth. She had deleted her social media accounts 2 months ago. The silence she left behind was the most honest thing she had ever produced. I took another sip of wine. I felt a vibration on the stone table. It was my phone. It was a new number, a local Italian carrier known only to Arthur and a few local contractors. Or so I thought. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown international number. The area code was Connecticut. I picked it up. I didn't need to guess who it was. Desperation has a unique digital footprint. Robert, the message read, "It's Patty. I got this number from your old accountant. Please don't ignore me. I'm sick. My legs hurt from standing all day. I can't pay the heating bill this month. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But we were married for 15 years. Doesn't that mean anything? I just need $5,000. Just a loan. I'll pay you back. Please, Robert." I'm scared. I stared at the words. 15 years. She used that number like a weapon, like a currency that still held value. She didn't understand that she had spent that currency long ago. She had spent it on gambling debts. She had spent it on lies. She had spent it on the day she sat in silence while her daughter erased me from the wedding invitation. I felt nothing. No anger. No pity. No urge to rescue her. The part of me that used to be her husband, the part of me that used to be a savior, had died in that empty kitchen in Greenwich. I looked at the fireplace built into the wall of the terrace. The fire was crackling, consuming the dry olive wood I had stacked earlier. The flames danced, hungry and bright. I did not type a reply. I did not block the number. That would be engaging. That would be acknowledging her existence. I stood up and walked to the fire. The heat flushed against my face. I looked at the phone one last time. It was a sleek, expensive device, a tool of communication. But to me in that moment, it was just a shackle. It was the last thread connecting me to a world of parasites. I tossed it. It was a gentle, underhand throw. The phone spun in the air, catching the light of the setting sun before landing in the heart of the fire. I watched it sit there for a second on the burning logs. Then the plastic began to bubble. The screen turned black, then cracked. Smoke curled up around it. The vibration of any future messages, any future pleas, any future guilt trips was silenced forever by the cleansing heat. I walked back to the table and picked up my wineglass. I walked to the edge of the terrace and looked out over the valley. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The bells of the village church began to ring in the distance, calling the faithful to evening prayer. I raised my glass to the empty air. I raised it to the west, toward the ocean, toward the prison cell, where a man in an orange jumpsuit was sleeping on a cot. To Gary, I said, my voice steady and strong in the quiet night, "Thank you." I swirled the wine, watching the legs run down the glass. You wanted to be the man. You wanted the suit. You wanted the credit. Well, you got it. You paid the bill for my freedom. You saved me from spending the rest of my life in a prison of my own making. So thank you for paying for the party of this life instead of me. I drank the wine. It was the best glass I had ever had. I sat back down in the chair and closed my eyes, listening to the fire pop and hiss as it finished its work. The sun vanished completely, leaving me in the darkness. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I lit a cigar, the flame illuminating my face for a brief second, revealing a man who was finally completely alone. And for the first time in my life, alone didn't mean lonely. It meant free. I took a drag of the cigar and exhaled a plume of smoke into the Italian night. Let them beg. Let them cry. Let them rot. I have grapes to harvest. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments. Do you think I was too harsh? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? And tell me, what would you have done with the phone? Until next time, remember, the best revenge is not just living well, it's living free.